Welcome to another edition of the Gun Owners News Hour Live Fire. Today we want to talk about something that's not settled history, shall we say. There's, I think, been in many people's mind a question, who really did kill Kennedy? Who really killed Kennedy is something that has now taken the shape of a book by that title, written by Dr. Jerome Corsi. We were told, of course, at the time that it was one guy, and I think a lot of people never really thought that one guy, especially with just one magic bullet, would be able to wreak the devastation that was done that day in that presidential limo in Dallas, November 22nd, 1963. I know where I was when the news came over the air, and people were shocked. People went home. That was the end of business for the day. What an unthinkable thing. President of the United States killed. Let's try to find out then who really did kill Kennedy. A lot of people kept their mouths pretty closed, but yet some of the evidence, Jerry, from what you were finding, was kind of hidden in plain sight.
Well, Larry, I think it's been the case. Clearly, the assassination of Jack Kennedy was a threshold moment. I mean, I think it was probably the last day when Americans truly trusted government. From that day forward, I think there's been great suspicion, and legitimately so, as I show in my book, Who Really Killed Kennedy, that I'm essentially arguing that this was a coup d'etat. And
yes.
That I start out basically with the forensic evidence, which I think is just compelling in making the case that Lee Harvey Oswald could not possibly have been the only shooter.
If he was a shooter indeed.
If he was a shooter indeed. I mean, I think it's compelling when the doctors at Parkland Hospital, and Jack Kennedy was brought to Parkland directly after the shooting. Within 5 minutes of the shooting, he was in Parkland. And the doctors at Parkland in Dallas were then as now world-class doctors, and taking one look at Jack Kennedy being brought into the operating room, I think the emergency room doctors realized that, first of all, there was nothing they could do to save his life. His head was virtually blown wide open and much of it missing, much of his brain gone. And the doctors did what they could, but universally, the recognition of the wounds was front entry wound, that the throat wound that they observed, on which they did a tracheotomy to open the wound and try to save Jack Kennedy's life, a futile effort, but one that needed to be made at least to show they tried. That was through the puncture wound was about the diameter of a number 2 lead pencil. So it was clearly an entrance wound. And the back of Jack Kennedy's head was observed by the doctors as blown away. Various of the doctors said they could look down into the back of Jack Kennedy's head and see how much of his brain was missing. And clearly, if the back of the head was blown away, that's a rear exit from a front entry wound. And confirming that, part of Jack Kennedy's skull, the Harper fragment, was actually picked up on the grass by the limousine the next day, which again confirms the back of Jack Kennedy's head was blown out by this shot. And any shooter from the front in the JFK assassination means that there had to be more than one, because the Texas School Book Depository was behind the limousine when the shooting started.
And as you point out very graphically, the limousine was located in an almost impossible line of sight, rapidly disappearing out of sight from the depository.
Right. The best shot, clearly from the 6th floor window of the Texas School Depository, if that's where the only shooter was, would have been as the limousine was coming down Houston Street and makes this left hairpin turn onto Elm Street right below the Texas School Book Depository. So you've got a front shot right into the limousine with the full body of Jack Kennedy there in front of you at the shortest possible distance. And instead, we're supposed to believe that Lee Harvey Oswald waited until the limousine was headed down Elm Street, past a tree, and all you could see would be the head and shoulders of Jack Kennedy. I mean,
and he would have been shooting with a rifle, as you point out, that is notoriously not accurate.
And also not correctly aligned. The scope on the weapon was set for a left-handed shooter, and it was not properly aligned. The Mannlicher Carcano rifle, and I'm sure many listeners are familiar with it, is a World War II Italian weapon.
Bolt action,
manual bolt action, where you've got to chamber each round, which means you manually doing that, you have to reacquire your target with each round, and using a scope of the distance that the shot was to be taken actually was a detriment, because you have to find the target, which is going to be greatly enlarged in the scope. You'd be better off just sighting the target manually along the sights of the weapon itself. And if you're going to take the shot, I mean, why wouldn't you have bought a M1 Garand, or the weapon that was found initially in the Texas School Book Depository was reported to be a Mauser, which was precision German weapon.
And that was a cop that made that identification.
Yes, and a cop who had owned a sporting goods store, who knew what he was doing, and it was observed by Roger Craig, also I think one of the more reliable and better of the investigators of the Dallas Police Department who recorded this. The Dallas Police Department went public on the record to the press that the weapon found was a Mauser. And then, of course, when the paper trail showed up that identified Lee Harvey Oswald with this A. Heidel alias and a mail-order weapon, I don't think actually Oswald knew anything about. Then all the reports changed, and suddenly the Mauser disappeared, and the rifle that supposedly found was a Mannlicher Carcano. And while they do look alike, the Mauser even had stamped in the metal by the trigger that it was a Mauser. I mean, I don't see how anyone could really have misidentified that weapon if they knew anything about weapons, and the police finding the weapon in the 6th floor school book depository knew weapons very well.
But one thing he didn't seem to know was forensic procedure. He didn't test it for fingerprints. He didn't sniff it to see if it had been fired, minutes ago. So a lot of key evidence was assumed.
And the only fingerprints that were ever found on that weapon appear to have been palm prints of Lee Harvey Oswald that were put on the weapon after Oswald was dead. The forensics in the case point to, the shooter, no shooter for the 6th floor depository. That would have been the worst place to position yourself. Also, it's a very low opening window. The window is about a foot off the ground and only opens another foot or so. So you can't be standing at that window and taking the shots. You've got to have your left arm pressed up against the corner, against pipes in the wall, and, with a very poor angle to take the shot from behind the tree.
Well, we're talking with Dr. Jerome Corsi. He's written Who Really Killed Kennedy? We're going to get to his best guess, which circumstantially I think we can say we're pretty sure we know. Maybe not the name of the trigger man, but certainly his master, the boss that ordered it done. I think he set the gold standard for researching. This is really an impressive book. The way you've turned up stuff that just comes out of little tiny places, evidence that may have been lying around in plain sight, but nobody had put it together. And those that might have heard it kind of disregarded it because, gosh, the Warren Commission has told us that it was one guy, one magic bullet. And, Arlen Specter might think people would take that as face value, because I don't think Arlen Specter even knew how to spell gun. He certainly didn't know anything about guns.
He certainly hadn't operated one, that's for sure.
Exactly. So
it was pretty pathetic because the single bullet theory is predicated on the idea that one bullet hit Jack Kennedy in the back, went through his body, Jack Kennedy's body, exited through his neck, hit John Connolly, came in John Connolly's back, broke a rib, entered John Connolly's wrist, broke a wrist bone, and then landed in John Connolly's thigh, and ended up being this pristine bullet, number 3, see Commission Exhibit 399.
I would love to own some ammunition that could make U-turns. That would just, you come back and do a double tap on that deer.
I'll tell you, I mean, it have, honing in ammunition that changes path of midstream. The whole issue of the wounds, when the back wound was discovered at Bethesda, the doctors doing the autopsy put a finger in the wound and determined that it only went in about 1/4 of an inch. They did not see any way that this wound had traversed the body of Jack Kennedy, and the wound was located not in the neck, where our inspector tried to move it, but in about 3 inches or 4 inches down from the shoulder line in the back.
Pretty close to the collarbone, then.
Yes, and I mean, this was not where below the collarbone. I mean, this was, even a couple of inches below the collarbone, maybe 3 inches below the collarbone. There's no way that bullet went upwards, and there's no medical evidence. The Bethesda Hospital autopsy thought that the magic bullet had gone in the, slightly in the back and fallen out. They did not search a path through Jack Kennedy's body to prove it had exited in the neck, which was observed, by the way, at Parkland Hospital as an entrance wound. As I point out in the book, Who Really Killed Kennedy here, the issue is a bullet that goes in the back closer to the Texas School Book Depository and does not penetrate the body compared to the farther down on Elm Street when the bullets hit Jack Kennedy's head and the head is blown apart. These are clearly different caliber bullets. These are different ballistics altogether. Probably different weapons, very possibly hollow-tipped or mercury-filled exploder-type bullets that blew the head apart. Whereas the back wound almost looks like it was a .22, a very low-caliber weapon that did not do massive damage when it hit. And the throat wound also looks to be much lower caliber because it did not exit the body as far as anyone was able to determine. If you've got different caliber weapons within a 10-second frame, less than 10 seconds, maybe as short as 5.6 was the seconds, which was the shooting time, Oswald, or really the person, I don't think Oswald fired a shot.
Apparently, from your investigation, he wasn't anywhere around.
No, he was I believe Oswald was on the second floor of the Texas School Book Depository the entire time. He was encountered
having lunch.
Having lunch in the lunchroom, drinking a Coke, found by one of the motorcycle officers who ran into the building, dropped the motorcycle from the motorcade, accompanied by one of the building supervisors, and they see Oswald in this lunchroom, and Oswald looks perfectly calm. Also, there was a girl on the stairs who has been found, and her testimony was given. The elevator was not working in the Texas School Book Depository, and she says she saw no one rushing down those stairs from the 6th floor. How did Oswald magically get to the 6th floor, look calm after shooting the President of the United States, and is sipping a Coke, and walks calmly out of the building?
Well, if Oswald has magic bullets, I guess Oswald himself must have been magic.
I guess so. I mean, and then, Larry, I point out in the book the evidence that the Warren Commission ignored. We now have the internal deliberations of the Warren Commission, and the General Counsel, Lee Rankin, wrote a memo in January 1964 of the Warren Commission saying that the Commission had evidence that Oswald was an FBI agent. They had his number, and that he was being paid $200 a month to give information to the Dallas FBI office. And the Warren Commission also had the CIA number as an agent of Oswald, and that Oswald had a CIA file, which, by the way, ended up amounting to about 50,000 pages. It was begun in 1960, and it was maintained in the CIA by James Angleton, who was tracking these military who, as double agents, defected to the Soviet Union, claiming that they wanted to give up their citizenship when really they were just trying to penetrate, as loyal U.S. citizens, the KGB. And Oswald evidently was in that group of agents. Now, when this was known to the Commission, Allen Dulles, who is one of the commissioners, former head of the CIA, who was fired by Jack Kennedy after the Bay of Pigs, I say probably the major of the plotters trying to kill Jack Kennedy.
He certainly had motive.
Yes, and he, in this on January 27th Warren Commission discussion, when this evidence comes available about Oswald being an agent, Allen Dulles says, this is just too damaging to the agencies. We can't let the American people know this. And so the Warren Commission lies and buries the information and says that Oswald had no connection with the CIA. And I think Allen Dulles' major role on the Warren Commission, appointed there by LBJ, was to make sure that the investigation did not reach the CIA or the FBI or even Lyndon Johnson or Allen Dulles personally.
And something of that sort, where you've got the head of your big spy agency involved in knocking off the president, maybe LBJ had something to do with that.
Well, and I think LBJ knew of the assassination, went along with it, clearly was the guy who benefited from it the most. As I point out in the photographs, even the famous Altgen Associated Press photograph, Lyndon Johnson's nowhere to be seen sitting next to Lady Bird. He's ducking down on the floor when the shooting starts. He's, winking in the airplane at Congressman Albert Thomas from Texas after Lyndon Johnson takes the oath of office. They're winking at one another. That picture, in a sequence of pictures, has mysteriously disappeared from the LBJ library, though copies of it are available. I have copies of it in various of the books and materials I have on the assassination. At any rate, the story with Allen Dulles is that Jack Kennedy would not fight the CIA's lying wars, including starting at the Bay of Pigs, when the CIA tried to trick Jack Kennedy into launching a naval airstrike from a carrier offshore of Cuba, and Kennedy would not go to war with Cuba over this CIA invasion.
Well, this is so interesting. And, of course, all of this you've been able to document, which is very impressive. When you get a hold of that book, you'll see this is not being made up out of whole cloth. You can go check this stuff out yourself. Back with Dr. Jerome Corsi talking about, I think, a book that's going to be a blockbuster. It is explosive. Who really killed Kennedy? All those players are now dead. Had this ever been published during their lifetime, oh my, would that have done something major in our political system. As you say, Terry, this was a coup d'etat.
It was a coup d'etat, and I traced, Larry, back the Dulleses, both John Foster Dulles, who was Secretary of State under President Eisenhower in 1953, and Allen Dulles, who Eisenhower appointed in 53 to head the CIA. Both the Dulles brothers were involved with the Brown Brothers Harriman firm before World War II in Wall Street, and they were financing Hitler. We financed Hitler. We, in Wall Street, gave Hitler the money he needed to arm and prepare for World War II. And the other partners in the Harriman firm were the progenitors of the Bush dynasty, Prescott Bush and George Walker, who, along with the Dulleses, were involved in running a Nazi bank, which was Union Bank in New York, which was not closed until October 42 by FDR, even though, the December 41 Pearl Harbor attack had put us to war with Japan, and then Germany declared war on the United States. This Nazi bank was still operating by the Dulleses and the Bushes. And I say Jack Kennedy was the first victim to the New World Order. This whole New World Order idea was a Hitler idea. And remember, Hitler was a leftist and it was first to introduce universal health care, by the way.
You're making that statement. Let's nail that even harder.
Yeah.
I was on Alan Colmes' show, and I said, of course, Hitler was of the left. And he said, what? That's crazy. Everybody knows he was on the right. No. Alan, consider the name Nazi is an acronym for National Socialist Workers' Party.
Right. And see, the big debate between the Nazis on the left and the communists was that the Nazis wanted there to be private property. The communists wanted to eliminate private property. Nazis wanted a partnership with government and business in which they would promote munitions and these lying wars, Reichstag fires, etc., with a huge intelligence agency that would take care of anybody, Gestapo, take care of anybody who disagreed, and a welfare state to provide those not able to participate, including universal health care.
Assuming they didn't gas you first.
Right, and unfortunately, much of this sounds like, if Hitler had known that Germany could rule the EU without a war, we'd be creating a transatlantic partnership that submerses our sovereignty, and then simultaneously, the NSA listening to all the conversations. This is a better Gestapo than he ever imagined having. And Dulles spent World War II in Bern, Switzerland, bringing, 1943, the Nazis knew they were going to lose. Bormann starts moving Nazi loot, today's dollars, trillions of dollars out of Germany, into the United States stock market and to Argentina with Dulles' help and the work of financial agents in Switzerland. We bring over at the end of the war an Operation Paperclip organized by Allen Dulles, at least 10,000 scientists, including Werner von Braun, all Nazis. Von Braun did the V-2 rocket with Jewish slave labor, built that rocket, a terror weapon against London. We forgave all that and brought Werner von Braun over to run our rocket program, including putting a man on the moon. And we brought over the Gehlen Gestapo organization, which formed one of the pillars of the original CIA.
See, what could be wrong with that?
Well, the Dulleses, I think, wanted us to be the Fourth Reich, and they wanted to fight these lying wars like Hitler would have fought, including Laos, which Kennedy also would not fight. Kennedy said that in Laos there was no resolve by the people to win their own war. It was a CIA-manipulated war, and the regime was corrupt. Kennedy said the same identical thing about Vietnam, and the speech he had in his pocket the day Kennedy died was how we would give military assistance to Vietnam, but we would not provide troops. The CIA, Lyndon Johnson, was happy to fight the CIA's lying war in Vietnam with the Gulf of Tonkin resolution on an incident that never happened. These supposed torpedo boats in North Vietnam hit the Maddox, a U.S. destroyer in the Gulf of Tonkin. The Maddox was an intelligence operation spying on North Vietnam, and it was not attacked by torpedo boats. But Johnson was happy to fight the war. The U.S. military wanted to innovate the military to fight guerrilla wars, and the military-industrial complex, as Eisenhower warned, Vietnam was the introduction of these no-compete, single-source contracts for weapon systems that prior to Vietnam, weapon systems had been built by multiple companies. Different companies could produce the same weapon system. So there were a lot of reasons Jack Kennedy would not go along with Allen Dulles and would not fight the lying CIA wars. And when Jack Kennedy fired Allen Dulles, he said he was going to break up the CIA into 1,000 pieces. And I believe had he been reelected, he would have done so.
And that, of course, was, as you've argued, saying those two things was to sign his death certificate unless he had been able to do them very quickly. But these guys didn't need a whole lot of time to put together a conspiracy that
they did not.
Took him out.
And the mob was a willing accomplice because, as I tell a story which I don't think that has ever been told before, of the Western mob, the Elkins family, which is the mob that controlled Reno and Vegas when it started, even back into the 30s, and the mob from the east moved into the Elkins territory with the Teamsters, trying to penetrate the Teamsters with Jimmy Hoffa. And the Western mob was Protestant, the Eastern mob was Catholic, it was all Irish, and also Jewish. And Joe Kennedy, Catholic but Irish, had never been accepted in the Eastern mob. So when the Elkins agreed to turn all this wiretapping evidence over on the Eastern mob, Joe Kennedy signed up and said, we'll use this material. J.B. Elkins was the chief witness to start the McClellan Committee hearings, to go ultimately that went after Hoffa. Joseph Kennedy had a vendetta against the Eastern mobs, and he continued to exact, even after Bobby Kennedy was Attorney General. Joe Kennedy went after the Eastern mobs with a vengeance, left the Western mobs alone, had a partnership with them. And, of course, the Eastern mob felt betrayed, especially because Sam Giancana and the Chicago mob had, in large part, delivered Chicago to Jack Kennedy the votes he needed to win the 1960 election in the 11th hour against Richard Nixon.
Deliver, we should say, as in manufacture, invent,
yes.
Stuff.
As the Democrats are continue to be good at today. And I point out that, the relevance of what I've written and who really killed Kennedy is that we're still, if Jack Kennedy had lived, we would have broken up the CIA. He was also going to break up the Federal Reserve and print our own money through the Treasury. We weren't going to fight in Vietnam.
Breaking up the Fed would alone probably been something to people might want to kill him for.
Well, and again, that's taking on the bankers and the money interests. And you've had the bankers and the money interests supporting Hitler, continuing to help the Nazis escape, wanting to continue the lying CIA wars. And, you know, people shouldn't be surprised when they say Saddam Hussein, where's the weapons of mass destruction? Oh, well, you know, CIA lying wars is what we have today. Again, in Syria, CIA, John Kerry's out there, Secretary of State, saying he's got evidence Assad did the chemical attacks. That's a CIA report. But, of course, we can't see the CIA report. And the UN disagrees and says, no, it was the rebels who did the chemical attacks. And these wars make no sense, as John Kennedy said, to U.S. national interests. The fighting in Syria, which the CIA would have us do on behalf of al-Qaeda and jihadi terrorists, could only be in the interest of Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
You know,
well, happily, the Congress didn't go along. And
happily, in that time, they did not. But the CIA today continues to lie to the American people, spy on the American people. Jack Kennedy would have destroyed it, broken up into 1,000 pieces in a second term. And it was just too dangerous to the interests like, you know, the Dulleses, Lyndon Johnson. The Kennedys were in the process of removing Lyndon Johnson from the ticket. Had Kennedy lived, and the next week, Life magazine would have published an article that would have about destroyed Lyndon Johnson's career.
That probably determined why it only took about 2 months to put the whole thing together and knock him off. Time was short. They had to act. Wow. What people will do. Dr. Jerome Corsi has given us quite a civics lesson. Oh, our government wouldn't do that. Well, our government, actually high officials in the government, arranged to have the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, assassinated by CIA and mobsters working in tandem. And it almost certainly wasn't poor Lee Harvey Oswald, who we now know wasn't even around. He was having lunch in the cafeteria at that depository, and then ended up in a movie theater. The timeline doesn't work for the real Lee Harvey Oswald. Somebody else was doing the job for him. In fact, you found pretty good evidence that 3 other people were doing the job in his place.
Well, yes, I mean, I found a number of the assassins, and I'm able to name some of the assassins. The one that I think hits me the strongest was this Corsican assassin who was part of the Marseille drug trade. He was actually part of the group that went back to the day of the Jackal that had been trying to kill de Gaulle at the end of World War II. Was in Dallas that day and picked up the CIA documents, and we have the memo, finally released in the National Archives, that this guy Sutra or Mertz was picked up in Dallas, professional assassin. No one knew what he was doing there, and he was released within a day or two by the Immigration Naturalization Service without investigation, let go.
An incredible number of people involved in this thing.
Yes, and also, I mean, of course, the CIA was already in 1962 in Laos, and in 63 involved in the drug trade, bringing heroin out of the Golden Triangle in Southeast Asia. And that was another reason the CIA wanted to fight Vietnam, because fight either in Laos or Vietnam, certainly fight in Southeast Asia to keep the drug trade going. And by the way, people should stop and ask why we're getting more heroin today out of Afghanistan than we did under the Taliban. And I'm going to give you my answer, which is, the U.S. Army and the CIA. The Army probably doesn't know anything about it, but the CIA knows everything about it and has run the drug trade since before World War II, when it was involved as the OSS.
Now, is this to give them a little slush fund?
Absolutely. It gives the CIA operating money off the books and enriches many of the people involved, allows the CIA to be a rogue organization, which I maintain it has always been, including assassinating Jack Kennedy. Also in Dallas that day was George H.W. Bush, the first Bush president. Remarkably, a photograph of George H.W. Bush exists in front of the Texas School Book Depository, and legitimate, authenticated documents where George H.W. Bush is reporting the CIA on and around the day of the assassination from Dallas, and Dallas newspaper announcements that put George H.W. Bush in Dallas at the time. Of course, Bush has lied about when he joined the CIA, said he did not join it until President Ford appointed him in the 1970s to head the CIA, but all the evidence is that George H.W. Bush was working with the CIA going back to when he created Zapata Oil, which may trace back to the late 50s, and played a role with Zapata Oil in the failed Bay of Pigs operation. So, the Bushes have dirty hands in this whole thing, going back to Prescott Bush and George Walker working with the Dulleses in financing Hitler.
Well, at least it's bipartisanship.
It's certainly bipartisan. This is the New World Order, Larry. These guys aren't. The two parties are an illusion. The Democrats and the Republicans are two wings of the same big government party moving toward, international control.
No wonder they hate Ted Cruz so much.
Oh, they hate Ted Cruz.
He's not playing by the rules.
No, he doesn't. He's not on the New World Order team. He actually believes that there's a difference between the two parties, or that at least conservatives have a different point of view, our founding fathers. And Jack Kennedy, by today's standard, would have been a conservative. He ran in a missile gap. He would not fight lying CIA wars unless, like George Washington said in his farewell address, they had a direct tie to our national interest. Kennedy would help any country fight for freedom, he said in his first inaugural, but he would not fight a losing CIA war and lying CIA war.
And certainly not with troops.
And not with troops. He would give military assistance, but not with troops, not with U.S. troops, or not with the U.S. military, Navy attacking Cuba. The CIA had the model for the assassination developed in Guatemala in the 50s when E. Howard Hunt, for a banana company, which was the United Fruit Company, created a coup d'etat so the government wouldn't give land back to the people. E. Howard Hunt created a fake army which invaded Guatemala as if they were freedom fighters, very similar to what E. Howard Hunt did for the Bay of Pigs operation with the invaders there, a CIA army. And when the CIA got a leader they didn't like in Guatemala, they assassinated him. No one saw the assassination. They said that this guy, Armas, was killed by a palace guard who then turned the a rifle on himself and killed himself. So you had the patsy dead, and this idea of a dead patsy in an assassination coup d'etat, which the CIA perfected the model of in Guatemala, was used to kill Jack Kennedy. And I point out in the book the record on the public record. People don't know about it, but that Dallas was the third attempt to assassinate Jack Kennedy in November '63. A nearly identical assassination plot that was foiled in Chicago at the beginning of November '63. Middle of '63, another major attempt was to kill Kennedy in Tampa. They involved the mob and the CIA working together. Each had its own patsy. The plot that succeeded was in Dallas, and it was on the same identical model of a patsy being involved. Patsy was Lee Harvey Oswald.
A guy that looked genuinely surprised when they picked him up, but as you have found out, it had to be three different guys stationed much closer to the limo than the book depository.
The damage done to Jack Kennedy, there were shots fired initially that barely penetrated the back and hit him from the front and the neck. Then as the limousine moved on, John Connolly was hit by a separate shot further down the road. Connolly maintained till the end of his life he was a separate shot. Connolly knew weapons. He was a sportsman. He and his wife both understood it was gunfire from the very beginning. And then the shots that killed Kennedy, and the head shots at frame 313 of the Zapruder film. And I believe the evidence is, again, Josiah Thompson did a very good study showing Kennedy's head first moves forward as if hit from the back. The front flap on his forehead is an exit wound, and almost simultaneously, Kennedy's hit from the front, closer to the Texas School Book Depository, and he's thrown violently back to the left against the car. The back of Kennedy's head is all blown out. And in fact, in some frames that people rarely watch of the Zapruder film, these are remarkable frames right at the end, Larry, when, Jackie Kennedy freaks out. She's in the back of the car. She's picking up her president's brain and trying to get it all back together again. Jackie Kennedy actually has Jack Kennedy sitting upright going through the triple underpass after he's been shot. He's totally dead. He looks not bad because she's put his head back together. And what you can see in those last few frames, if they're properly blown up and enhanced, there's some you can see on the Internet today that show the back of Kennedy's head blown out, just like the doctors at Parkland Hospital said they observed.
That did it. He gets up to Bethesda mighty fast, and there were actually people telling the doctors doing the autopsy, don't do this, do that. That's incredible.
Yes, I document who was in the room, and that the doctors were supervised by some politicos or military who gave instructions for certain procedures which would be normal to an autopsy not to be performed. The doctor performing the autopsy, Hume, wasn't even an autopsy expert.
Nothing but the first team there. Who really killed Kennedy? Dr. Jerome Corsi, thanks for bringing us a lot closer to an answer. It looks like the man who had the most to benefit probably encouraged the CIA and the mob to go right on ahead. Thanks very much for what you've been doing. I'm Larry Pratt of Gun Owners of America, and I want to invite you to join the Second Amendment movement with Gun Owners of America, the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington. Take action by becoming a GOA member today by going to gunowners.org. Gun Owners members receive the GOA newsletter, fact sheets, alerts, certificates, and more. But there's more to joining GOA than just a list of member benefits. The united voice of GOA members has been successful in defeating restrictive legislation designed to disarm our population. GOA has helped to get strong constitutional members of Congress like Senator Ted Cruz elected. And with your help, GOA will continue to successfully defend the rights of gun owners in the courts. Participate in our efforts to restore and preserve the nation's right to keep and bear arms. All contributions to our lobbying efforts are used exclusively to support or oppose firearms legislation. Join online at gunowners.org.